Okay, all these three problems involve square roots, so we'll start with the easy one, number 11, which is simply the square root of 169. And what you're saying when you talk about a square root is you're saying what number times itself will equal 169. Or another way is to say what number squared will give you the number inside. Okay? What number times itself will give you 169? Well, you may have known this from just, you know it, but it is 13 times 13 is 169. So then the answer is D. But I want to point something else out just that's worthwhile, and it's kind of like once you know these little things, it saves you time, is that if you multiply an even number times an even number, you'll always get an even number. If you multiply an odd number by an odd number, you're always going to get an odd number. So if we have an odd number as a result, after multiplying some number by itself, well, the only way you can get an odd number is if you multiplied an odd times an odd. So when squaring, if the number's odd, then the square root of it would also be odd, assuming whole numbers. So that eliminates having to think about something like this. Just going a little further here, if you were to square this number, any decimal number, any number that's not a whole number, when you multiply it, is going to become another decimal number. So what you see here is this was just that number divided by 2. It wasn't actually correctly done. But the way that you can check these numbers is to say, well, I'm going to multiply them by themselves, because these are supposed to be the square roots. So if we multiply this by itself, do I get 169? No. In fact, multiplying this by 2 gives us that. That's just not what square root means. Dividing this by 2 gets you that. It's not what square root means. Multiplying this by multiplying this by itself, squaring it, like I said, will give you an even number, but it also won't result in that. So you can just multiply by itself to check. Multiplying this by itself, it works. Okay, so we know it's D. Now let's moving on to this next one. We can say, okay, what number times itself equals 25 over 100? Well, what number times itself equals 25? Well, that would be 5. What number times itself equals 100? Well, that would be 10. So this squared will equal what's inside the square root. It's just the way that it is. Now, how can you do this mathematically if you wanted to think about it a different way? Is you could say, when you square root a fraction, the entire fraction, you can get the same result, exactly the same result, by square rooting the top and square rooting the bottom. Square root of 25 is 5. Makes sense because 5 times itself will give you 25. Square root of 100, 10. So that means that this squared equals what's inside, and you can then say, but Mr. Massey, I don't see that as an answer choice. Good point. Do you see that this is a fraction you can simplify? 5 over 10 can be simplified to what fraction down here? It can be simplified to 1/2. So you actually get equals 1/2, and that's B. If the square root of that is 1/2, then why wasn't the number inside just 1/4? Because 1/2 times itself is 1/4. Well, actually, it is. If you do 1/2 times 1/2, you get 1/4. And also, I'm just going to write below here, if you were to then simplify this fraction that's inside, because it's not a simplified fraction, if we were to simplify it by dividing both top and bottom by 25, you would get 1/4. That is what you get when you multiply 1/2 by itself, or when you square 1/2. So it makes sense that this squared equals this, which is equivalent to that. So square rooting that should give you 1/2. If you that might have been a lot of information for you. Hopefully you could track it. But if you couldn't, let's just go this far and say this. Take the entire fraction that's square rooted and split it up into the square root of the top over the square root of the bottom. And when you get your results, see if you can simplify them. You can in this case, so we're going to mark it. Yep, okay, so one more, and this is actually hopefully even simpler based on what you've already seen, is square root of 169. Again, you could say the square root of 1 over the square root of 169. Square root of 1 is 1, because 1 times 1 is 1. And the square root of 169, we already did that up top, is 13. And that would be B. Yep, there you go.